Welcome to the Estate Blueprint, Planning Your Future with Tom Begley.
Hello and welcome back to the Estate Blueprint with Attorney Thomas D. Begley III, founder of Thomas D. Begley III, LLC in Moorestown, New Jersey. Tom is a certified elder law attorney with more than 35 years of experience helping South Jersey families protect what they've worked for through estate planning, special needs trusts, Medicaid planning, and probate administration. I am your host, Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're talking about how to plan when a spouse is facing health challenges. The goal is to make sure each spouse gets the care they need while protecting the family's savings and home. Tom, welcome back.
Good to be back, Kevin.
So when one spouse's health starts to decline, what are the first planning steps the couple should take before a real crisis hits?
Yeah, okay. Well, basically, I've often broken it into three steps. The first step is to make sure the proverbial affairs are in order. A lot of times people will have well-written wills to talk about what's going to happen with their assets when they pass away, but they don't have advanced medical directives such as a durable healthcare power of attorney and living will, or a general durable power of attorney to handle finances. And it's amazing the number of times over the years where somebody could have gotten that stuff done very inexpensively for even a few $100s just for the advanced directives and powers of attorney. And we wind up having to blow about $4,000 or $5,000 in court to get a guardianship instead. So step number one is make sure that everybody has their wills and or trusts, healthcare directives, and financial powers of attorney in line. The second thing, which people sometimes will consider doing, is protecting the house. So maybe somebody's not ill yet, but as my grandfather said many years ago upon turning the age of 80, he said the warranty on the parts is starting to expire. People are starting to slow down, and they're concerned about issues. Sometimes what they'll do is move a certain amount of assets into a trust to make sure that if the 5-year look back / penalty for Medicaid can come and go, and those assets would be protected, but they would still retain enough assets in order to pay for long-term care if they needed it. Typically, the asset that people will put into that sort of a trust is a residence. There's a concept called the Children's Trust or the Residence Trust, and it's one of the rare areas in the law where you can have your cake and eat it too. Basically, mom and dad can put the house into a trust. Now, their child could be, or somebody else, but typically it's one of their adult children would be the trustee, and they can't get any income or principal, but it's an illiquid asset to begin with. And secondly, if they're not planning on selling, it's really a non-issue. The only two things that they can't do are mortgage the property, and most people are not looking to slap on mortgages under the property when they're 70s, 80s, and 90s. And if they sell the property and they want to move, the trustee has to be the one that facilitates that. The thing that is very important is we put in what's called a right to use and occupy in the deed when we transfer everything into the trust. And that way, mom and dad are safe. Nobody can have an argument over Thanksgiving and throw them out on the street. And also it provides tax benefits for the children, such as if the property is sold during a lifetime, mom and dad retain their $250,000 per person or $500,000 exemption for capital gains. And the trust also allows for a step-up in basis on capital gains when they pass away. So the other thing, when people are getting into, what I refer to as the crisis, then we started looking at, doing, a very serious undertaking where we're looking at the overall assets and trying to minimize exposure to long-term care costs. For many people, that's a 5-year plan, but there are some exceptions dealing with children with disabilities, individuals that provide care for a period of years in a home, that keep somebody out of a nursing home for at least 2 years. But of course, the big provision switch I know we're talking about today, Kevin, is how do we take care of the spouse?
How does New Jersey's Medicaid program treat married couples differently from single individuals when it comes to qualifying for long-term care coverage?
So basically, as far as married couples are concerned, we have what's called countable assets and non-countable assets, and they're exactly what they sound like. A countable asset is an asset that the state counts in order to determine whether somebody is eligible for Medicaid benefits. And a non-countable asset is one which they do not. So if you're single, typically the only thing that you have that is considered non-countable is personal effects, with one exception. If you're actually still residing in your home, then while you're residing in your home, you can have an automobile of a modest value to take you back and forth to, say, doctor's appointments. And you can also have, your residence. But once you have to leave the home and enter either into assisted living or into a nursing home, then those assets have to be sold. Now, when you're married, you're entitled to basically 4 protections in addition to the personal effects. One of the spouses can hold on to the house. The second is that they can keep a car. The third is they're entitled to what's called the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. And the fourth is what's called the community spouse resource allowance. So let me break them down for you. So as far as the house is concerned, they are allowed to reside in the house. But a lot of people don't know is that they can actually transfer the house into the name of what we call the community spouse. That's the one who will stay inside, the community. It's just like it sounds. The other one's what we call the institutionalized spouse. Once again, these are terms that are pretty much self-evident. A lot of times people don't change the deed, and what they don't realize is that, unfortunately, unless it gets repealed, there's a concept called estate recovery. So let's assume, I get sick and go to Happy Acres Nursing Home, and my wife continues to reside in the house, but she passes away. Well, the house would have to be sold to pay for my care. Or the other is, something happens, we're both gone, the house is still there. The state can say, well, over the course of 2 years, we paid $150,000 for Tom's care. So when the house sells for $750,000 before the kids get anything, the state gets paid back the first $150,000. So one thing that spouses are allowed to do with the house is to take it out of joint name and to put in the name of the healthy spouse, because the state cannot put a lien on what the person who's receiving Medicaid does not own. The other thing you do there is also make sure, though, that the house doesn't bounce back to the spouse in the nursing home if the healthy spouse dies first, which does occasionally happen. So there's a way that you would restructure your will to minimize how much would go to to an institutionalized spouse if the healthy spouse dies first. The car, once allowed, you're allowed to keep an automobile in the name of the community spouse. You can technically you can keep one, but it makes common sense, obviously, if your husband or wife is in the nursing home, to just put the car in your name if you're out in the community. So the other ones are called the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance. And so what that is, recognizes you have to have a minimum amount of income flowing into your home just to be able to live. In a lot of the older generations that are still out there, it used to be a one-income family. I mean, we kind of take it for granted sometimes that everybody that's married, both spouses typically tend to work.
Right.
A lot of times, the husband would work and the wife would stay home taking care of the kids. So when they retired, the husband had a really nice pension and nice Social Security, but the wife, her Social Security might be relatively modest. So one of the things that I've seen happen over the years is that the wife will get, she'll have like $900 from Social Security, and her husband has to go to the nursing home. Well, $900 a month is, it's not going to pay for a lot. I mean, in New Jersey, you could barely pay for the property taxes, and the utilities. Good luck trying to afford a bag of groceries.
Right.
So what the minimum monthly maintenance needs allowance says is that before the income of the institutionalized spouse has to go to the nursing home, and that's how it works, by the way. Medicaid pays what's called a reimbursement rate. So if you go to Happy Acres Nursing Home and they charge, $12,000 a month, the state maybe pay $9,500. The state never pays whole price. But let's say dad is going to go to the nursing home, that's $2,500. If the reimbursement rate is $2,500, dad's $2,500 minus a little allowance for personal needs gets paid over to the nursing home, and then the state picks up the tab for the other $7,000. That's his income, says $2,500. So recognizing that mom is not able to live off of $900, the government says that she's entitled to, at the very least, a maintenance allowance, and for this current year, it's $2,643.75, and that's the minimum amount. So, if using that example, mom's making $900 and dad has a few $1,000s of income, before that income gets paid over to the nursing home, mom's allowed to keep $1,743.75 of his income so she can keep up with that $2,600 number. Now, in the state of New Jersey and most states, there's basically a shelter allowance. So they will calculate, what the expenses are, maintaining your home. And a lot of times you can get a few hundred or up to an extra thousand or so, an extra income to make sure that you're surviving. And the last thing is what's called the Community Spouse Resource Allowance. And the Community Spouse Resource Allowance is, it's kind of an odd thing. It says, out of all those countable assets, so in this case, we protected the house, we protected the car, the personal effects, but all the liquid assets, those have to be divided in half. And, the spouse keeps half, and that in the nursing home that has to be spent down, and the other half stays with the community spouse. And just to clarify, you don't have to spend all of that one half on the institutionalized spouse. You can buy things for value to minimize the exposure to long-term care costs. But the way it's calculated is a little bit odd. See, let's say, for example, you're married and you've got $300,000. Well, it's kind of easy. You divide that in half, and under the states and federal government's formula, mom who's staying at the house keeps $150,000 or half of that. The problem is there's a cap. So let's say, for example, there's $500,000. Well, common sense would say mom keeps $250,000, right? Well, no. According to the government, it's capped at $157,920. Now, on the flip side of the coin, if mom and dad only have $40,000 in liquid assets, mom's actually allowed to keep a minimum, which is $31,584. And that's how the figures are for 2025. These get adjusted every year. So basically in 2026, January 1, which is just around the corner, that maximum amount's going to get increased to $162,660.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff for the spouse out there.
Yeah, that's good. It sounds like it. What do you feel like the best planning tools that are for couples to put in place while they're both still competent, like, to make all of this easier later on?
Okay, so I guess, rule of thumb, make sure that you have solid estate planning documents. And so the will goes without saying in the healthcare directives, because you want to have the ability to make medical decisions if your husband or wife goes into a hospital, and not just a nursing home, but otherwise you do have to pay for an expensive guardianship to make medical decisions. But the big one is the power of attorney. A lot of people have kind of a bare bones one. I call it the pay the bills form, and it allows somebody to basically take over and write the checks to pay the electric and gas company and the water company if somebody gets sick. But it doesn't have any planning features. So a good power of attorney, which you should get when you're young, allows for gifting, and has provisions for establishment and funding of trusts, and also just we call it catastrophic illness power. So you want to have some very detailed provisions that allow transfers of assets to be made lawfully. In most states, if you don't have those provisions in there, those transfers are considered void. It stems back to a case from the 1990s called Casey versus Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, where somebody had one of those boilerplate powers of attorneys that allowed for the payment of bills, and they were making gifts to their siblings when their parent was sick to minimize exposure at that time to the estate tax. But what happened was after their parent passed away, all those gifts had to be called back into the estate because the power of attorney was not authorized to make them. So you want to make sure you have a solid estate planning documents. And then a lot of it's really responsive. So there's a couple times that I look at doing planning. The first is, as I said, that example that I used earlier, the parts are wearing out. At that particular point in time, I feel comfortable telling people, transfer the house, because let's face it, nobody gives a hoot what the name of the deed is, as long as they can live in the property without anybody overseeing them or overlooking them. Nobody cares. When it comes to liquid assets, I mean, if there's an enormous amount, maybe do some movement into a trust at that particular point in time. But more often than not, and I may be a little irreverent for saying this, I say when you get the warning shot. See, there's two primary populations that go into assisted living facilities and nursing homes. Now, for the nursing homes, one is the massive stroke victim. And that's where they don't go into assisted living, they go solely into nursing homes. But they're not going to be around for a lot. We're not talking about the stroke where, dad has a stroke and gets some rehab and goes back home after a month or so and continues to live life with maybe some minimal difficulty of it all. We're talking about the massive stroke where really, you're going to be gone in a few months. So I've always thought that planning for people in that situation is just wrong because a 5-year look back, I mean, they're going to be long gone. I mean, you're stealing somebody's money. So I may not be the most popular guy in the profession for saying that, but I think if our goal is to have people keep their money, we shouldn't be taking it unnecessarily. The other one is Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. Years and years ago, when I got started in the practice of law back in 1990, people, when they got diagnosed with Alzheimer's, typically at the outside, they didn't live more than 7 years. 10 years would be really out there. So, and also the progression of the disease was a lot quicker. But over the last 15, 20 years, with the advances in pharmaceuticals in particular, especially in the early stages, Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia slowed down a lot. As a result, people are living sometimes 15 to 20 years with dementia. Well over 10 years. And as a result, you can do some planning when somebody's diagnosed, because you don't get diagnosed with Alzheimer's one day and go to the nursing home the next.
Right.
More often than not, people can stay in their home for a few years before they would need an institutional level of care. And that's important because basically, Kevin, let's say, you're married and your wife gets diagnosed with, dementia, you come and see me. And what I would say is that as far as your, wife is concerned, we want to make sure that, if we can keep her in the house for a few years, and we could move some assets around. Now, December of 2025, when we're taping this, so any eligibility wouldn't happen until, 5 years from now. But most likely, she's not going to need care for 3 years. Now, 3 years is okay. Some people say, well, why don't we protect for all 5? Well, if I get somebody on Medicaid day one, that's great, except for the fact that the nursing homes, especially that take Medicaid on the first day, are not optimal, to put it nicely. The quality of care is, just because of the revenue streams going in and out of there, are, usually a lot of times you risk a very poor quality facility in which your, loved one's going to live. Whereas if you have a couple of years of what we call key money, the key to get into a nicer facility, you always want to keep that around. And I also like having that amount of money because you still want some independence. I mean, at the very outset of the show, Kevin, you talked about how we want to keep money aside for the children, and that's certainly a wonderful objective. But I always say that when you're married, that's the third objective. The first objective is we want to make sure that the person who needs medical care gets top shelf care. But the second is to make sure the person who's staying at home is able to enjoy a good quality standard of living. I mean, taking care of the children is important, but that's really like number 3. So we want to make sure that they have some comfort, but also some independence as well. Nobody wants to get on the phone and call their child and say, hey, this is Pops, I'm 86 years old, but can you spare me a couple of bucks this weekend?
Right.
Especially when it's from their own money.
Yeah. Wow. Well, a lot to keep in mind. Planning is everything. That is one thing that we talk about a lot on this show. So hopefully everybody out there took that away from this discussion. That is it for today's episode of The Estate Blueprint with Attorney Thomas D. Begley III. To learn more about Tom's work in estate planning, elder law, and Medicaid planning, visit Begley3law.com. That is the number 3. You'll find resources to help you protect your assets, care for your loved ones, and plan with confidence. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future episodes. And Tom, great chatting with you as always. Thanks so much.
Likewise, Kevin. Take care.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.